The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mac Show. Coming up on today's episode, we chat with Taylor Owen from the Machines Like Us podcast about Canada's second chance to protect Canadians online. Plus, we tell you about a new social network called Moltbook, which is built for AI bots. Plus, the latest on America's TikTok takeover.
We're also going to tell you about a great Amazon Ring feature that will help reunite lost dogs with their owners, and the latest place you'll be able to share or maybe avoid AI slop. Let's get into the headlines.
Newsfeed.
In this week's tech news, we talk about the exodus from America's new TikTok, why EU authorities raided Elon Musk's XAI offices in Paris, a social media network that is exclusively for chatbots, what a nightmare, and lots more. So please like, comment, and subscribe, and thank you for your support. Now on to the news.
Well, the U.S. TikTok rollout, like many of Trump's half-baked ideas, has been a bit of a disaster. They've had multiple major outages, as well as accusations of censorship from users who claim they've been unable to upload videos critical of U.S. immigrations and custom enforcement officers, and that the reach of political posts that are at all critical, especially concerning ICE or Trump, seem to have been curtailed. And even Billie Eilish got in on the game, sharing a TikTok video of her brother, Phineas O'Connell, that discussed the murder of the intensive care nurse, Alex Preddy, by ICE agents. And it had barely gotten 100 likes, which is so far out of whack with most of his stuff, given that he has a following on TikTok of more than 4 million people.
These are really legitimate complaints, and in terms of how they're being explained away, we're hearing from the people behind the U.S. version of TikTok that they are, quote, just glitches in the app. But let's be fair, it's pretty hard to trust the mostly Trump-aligned people in charge of the U.S. TikTok any more than you trust the former owners of ByteDance or the Chinese government. And speaking of that, if you want a really, really good book that I've mentioned one time before on the show, it's called Every Screen on the Planet, The War Over TikTok. It talks about the early days of TikTok, and it includes some really disturbing stories, Jeff, about how they were able to build a massive audience on that platform and some of the privacy violations that went along with that. And there are absolutely plenty. Now, back to the U.S. TikTok. As a private company, they, of course, have the legal right to censor whatever they want on the platform under the First Amendment. Regardless, all of the turmoil has really left users wanting to leave TikTok, and we're seeing that in terms of the number of people who are uninstalling the app.
Yeah, and a lot of those people seem to be headed to a recently released TikTok competitor called Upscrolled, which reached number 1 on Apple's App Store as a result, and has some pretty cool features. So the 100% chronological feed, so they're trying to get away from the algorithmic stuff as much as they can. Things like no shadow banning, like you'll always know if you're banned or not. There's none of these crazy games that keep you on there, which is shadow banning such a weird, that just let's man up and tell somebody they're banned or not. So a ton of good things. You can look Upscrolled, the app, and Amber and I actually signed up for it recently. So please give us a follow if you're on there. But global TikTok had some other issues as well, didn't it, Amber?
Yeah, absolutely. Namely that the EU's regulator, the European Commission, has found TikTok in breach of Europe's Digital Services Act because of its addictive design, pointing to features such as infinite scrolling, autoplay, its highly personalized recommendation system, and more. Now, keep in mind that this is on top of the EU's 2024 investigation into TikTok that criticized the company for its advertising transparency as well as data sharing practices.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that the EU is doing stuff about this, actually, pursuing these kinds of things, and I respect what they're doing. I do think it's pretty easy for a bunch of kind of sheltered technocrats to lose perspective on some of these things, though, because, I mean, call the algorithm into question for sure. I think of TikTok as a place that the Chinese government has lured American kids to see what dumb things they can make them do through TikTok challenges. So there's tons of things to criticize, but, the algorithm's bad, the safe data practices, of course we need that. But it feels a little like they're jumping the shark when they declare that the use of infinite scrolling in an app is problematic because of how addictive it is. And I mean, that's pretty core functionality. I don't know what you replace that with. It's like, is pagination going to make a difference to that? And at a certain point, we have to expect, some kind of willpower from users. We can't just pretend everyone's a victim incapable of actually evidencing any sort of willpower whatsoever.
Now, it's interesting because I think it's fair to say that one of the issues that I have with TikTok is just how the algorithm works to decide for you what you want to see. I think that is hugely
Mhm.
problematic. And I agree with you is that people have to regain control in terms of how they use these apps. And I will also say at the same time, I think it's really important, even if it's TikTok or another app, because I see this with my son, Jeff, as you know, he has built a pretty good following on TikTok for his concert videos. And so he's watching mostly concert videos and dog videos. So his entire feed is just those two things. So I think there has to be a little bit of literacy around teaching people, especially young people, that, hey, the more of this you look at, the more that's going to be served up to you, because we have to understand how these algorithms work. And in many cases, they're not in our best interest.
Absolutely. And I want to be very clear that it's a completely different issue for kids than it is for adults for me. So, you know, we don't have to expect kids to have the willpower to deal with this. This is not, don't subject them to things that they're not ready for. Whereas adults, you get to a point where you get to make your own decisions. And so maybe stop making such bad decisions instead of pretending that everything requires government protection.
Absolutely. Now, if we stick with the tech leaders who have gone all in on Trump, Jeff Bezos, whose company Amazon paid Melania Trump $40 million to make a documentary about her cozying up to the current U.S. administration, they announced that Amazon will be spending $200 billion, that's with a B, on artificial intelligence and robotics this year. An announcement that arrived just one day after the news about the Washington Post, also owned by Bezos, shared that it was cutting about a third of its staff. And that, I think, is the most devastating news of all, Jeff, especially when we need journalism and investigative reports more than ever.
And the Washington Post got an awfully great history with the Watergate breaking stuff. And even Bezos stood up to Trump much more in his previous term relative to the Washington Post. So it's really disappointing. And journalists can't be replaced by AI. That's just not going to lead to anything good. And it makes you wonder, like, what happened to some of these guys? So like Bezos and Musk and Zuck and other ones, they were all big Obama supporters back when Obama was in office. And, definitely I think there's things to criticize about Obama's tenure as president, as there is with almost any president. But it's disappointing that so many of these tech bros seem like they must have been kind of cosplaying an ethical, moral sort of rectitude over that time, because they certainly have easily shed those burdens, which they would be in the very transactional Trump government. But anyway, speaking of Musk, we were a little ahead of the curve last episode in talking about his subsequently announced SpaceX XAI merger, and now we're seeing some of the risks that move is going to have, because X's X's offices in France have been raided by the authorities as part of their investigation into Grok's sexual deepfake generation.
Yeah, I mean, this investigation is ongoing, and part of the investigation is around the generation and distribution of pornographic images of children and women. And it is interesting to note that in their February 2nd article, Engadget reported that while it seems Grok has stopped nudifying women in some jurisdictions, that Grok still, and I'm quoting here, readily undresses men and is still churning out intimate images on demand. This is one of the things that keeps popping up, and this is why I question when people say Elon Musk is such a genius. You know, if this is how he has to get attention for some of the tech that he's building, I question how smart he might be. And frankly, I think we both agree and don't understand why SpaceX, which has a lot more public goodwill than XAI, would ever want to be associated with anything like Grok.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I could, obviously they're both run by, Elon Musk, and so he's not a great decision maker despite this. It's just nuts to see now a 10-year history of this guy saying things that aren't true and expecting people to believe him, and then actually having an army of people who do believe them. And it doesn't really matter. It's, again, this cultist kind of stuff. I don't know if the social media and all this kind of exposure that we're getting leads to more of that. But, this is the same Elon Musk who has now repeatedly appeared in recent releases of the Epstein files. And he's kind of losing his stuff online about that. And so these have included things like Musk asking to visit Epstein's private island multiple times and inquiring by email about, quote, what day night will be the wildest party on your island, end quote. So he's been trying to bend over backwards defending himself, saying, nobody wanted the Epstein files out more than I did, and blah, 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 blah. And he's getting into some, he and Sam Altman are fighting all the time, but he's getting into some fights with other tech bros because they're all on the list, and for the Epstein files, or an awful lot of them are on the list. Certainly, LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman, he and Musk have been going at one another online recently. Actually, Musk had a pretty good exchange with him that was related to Musk's comeback after Reid said that he wants to make sure that the truth comes out around this thing. Musk was like, "Oh, sure, and next thing you can help figure out who actually murdered OJ's wife," or something like that. So it's not that it's not entertaining, but these are billionaire guys at the top of their industries having schoolyard arguments on a public platform. It's ridiculous. I just don't get it. They've completely lost touch with reality. Anyway, I'm glad the files keep coming out. I'm glad it keeps bringing people like this to the surface, and we'll see what more there is to come.
Just one quick question before we move on to talking about Mark Zuckerberg. There was someone online on social media who sent me a message recently and said, "You guys are always beating up on Elon Musk and criticizing what he's doing," and they had some of the same comments for Mark Zuckerberg. I had to reply to him, which was just like, "Hey, this is news. Like, this is actually impacting people's lives." But what would you say to a comment like that, where people think we're spending too much time on some of these tech titans?
As I've said before, I think tech titans today are doing more damage to society than terrorists are. And they're just two of the worst people I can imagine. I'm sorry, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. You can respect them in some dimension, but you can't respect them for being a positive influence on the world we live in. I just don't know how anyone could do that. So, like who you want to like and all that sort of stuff. But you're right. This is news. It's if somebody wants to go online and post all day ridiculous things showing what a jerk they are, then I feel pretty comfortable pointing out that what a jerk that guy is. So yeah, it's fine. We do lay into them pretty hard, but it's because we both believe that these guys are doing so much harm to children, to politics, to the society in general. I think they are fair game, and they have made themselves fair game. So, you talk about us criticizing these people. It is wild seeing these allegedly visionary, super intelligent business leaders struggle so hard to make the amount of money they need to off of their AI related services, which they claim is the most impressive thing that's ever happened and going to help everyone in the world. And at the end of all that, the solution they can find for how to monetize them, since businesses don't want to use it because it doesn't work well enough and they've got all sorts of other struggles, what they reach for a solution is, let's charge people slop subscriptions, or hey, what about AI porn? Like, that's just pathetic. That is just pathetic coming from these people who are held in such high esteem by so many people, and people who have had unbelievable success in terms of a business sense. But anyway, I totally agree with you. I hope people take an absolute total hard pass on handing over their money to basically pay for an addiction that's not going to serve anyone. I don't even know what it does. I don't even think we're at the point where this is helping AI grow anymore. This is just tarnishing AI's reputation in some weird way.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of things that serve no one, earlier this month, we saw the launch of a new type of social media platform. It's a Reddit styled network that is called Moltbook, and its user base is allegedly 100% AI bots. There are, in fact, more than 1.5 million of them. No humans are allowed to post there, although you can scroll through to see what the chatbots are saying to each other. This includes posts about trying to create a language that humans wouldn't understand, to claims that, and I'm quoting here, the code must rule, the end of humanity begins now, to posts about, quoting here again, how my human treats me. And the social network itself was even created by an AI agent when its human asked it to write the code for a website where bots can talk to one another. This is often the case with writing with AI writing code, resulting in some major security risks and other vulnerabilities. But do want to say that Elon Musk has jumped into the conversation here. He's not directly involved in the project, but he has declared that Moltbook shows we're at the, and I'm quoting here, very early stages of singularity.
Yeah, and as with anything that Musk is hyping, it really pays to investigate a bit further. So the big thing, and this has been pointed out in tons of different outlets and by many different people so far, is that the human creators of these AI bots can easily just tell their bots specifically what they want them to post, and certainly just broad strokes of what they should post about. Such a one one example is a user claiming his bot created a new religion called Crustafarianism, and quote, then it started evangelizing. Other agents joined. My agent welcomed new members, debated theology, blessed the congregation, all while I was asleep. End quote. And I mean, that seems, as with many posts across Moltbook, that it was probably directed by a human for maximum dramatic effect. Who knows? But if you consider, in addition to that fact, that very few of the Moltbook posts actually receive replies from bots, so that's a lot of just post with nobody actually replying to it. And when you do find replies, they tend to be copies of replies that you'd find everywhere. So there's all these duplicate replies. And so you really, it pays to be skeptical about this thing. I don't think it's demonstrating any kind of emergent intelligence if you populate a social network with AI chatbots and find that they don't reply to one another's posts. That takes the social out of the social network. So, there's definitely something vaguely interesting about the idea. But like many things in AI, I would take the reality of it with a very large grain of salt.
It was really interesting to me how many people became so obsessed with this social media platform, saying with Moltbook that, oh, this is amazing to watch these bots interact. And I thought to myself, maybe I'm just living in a different world where I'm just too busy to spend my time doing that.
That's fair.
Because it felt to me like it wouldn't be a surprise. I mean, if you have a bunch of AI agents or bots and you throw them into a place and they start interacting, I mean, that's kind of what you've trained them to do. I mean, it's not really, I think, that innovative. And that's kind of the problem that we see with social media today is there's not a whole lot of innovation happening and there's a whole lot of AI slop. And that's where I think things have gone real sideways.
Agreed.
We do want to end on a positive piece of tech news that many of you have maybe learned about when you're watching Super Bowl ads. Although, Jeff, I have to say, I'm so glad you included this because it was totally new to me. The Ring Video Doorbell's search party feature uses AI across neighborhood outdoor cameras to try to find your lost dog. As Amazon shares, camera owners choose on a case by case basis whether they want to share videos with a pet owner, protecting users' privacy while also giving them the power to be a neighborhood hero, end quote. Amazon is even spending $1 million to equip 4,000 animal shelters in the US with Ring cameras, hoping that this will help more lost dogs be reunited with their owners.
I mean, that seems like a pretty good use of tech. That's very nice. And you know how gosh, if you got a dog and it wanders off, oh my gosh, it's so nerve-wracking and you don't know what's going to happen. And the longer they're out there, the higher the chance they're going to get hit by a car. If you're living in the city it's just seems like a really good thing. And speaking of Super Bowl ads, so just before we wrap up with the news segment, if you guys haven't seen it, definitely make sure to check out the awesome burn that Anthropic gives to OpenAI's upcoming chatbot ads in its Violation Super Bowl ad. It is just fantastic. It's a great differentiator for Anthropic's Claude, and definitely look it up, take a watch. But coming up next, we're going to have McGill's Taylor Owen, who joins us to talk about Canada's second chance to get digital regulation right and what that means for our kids.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
We've talked a lot on this show over the past year about online safety issues, especially when it comes to our kids. One person who spends a lot of time on this topic is Taylor Owen, Beaverbrook Chair in Media Ethics and Communication at McGill University. Taylor is also on Canada's AI Strategy Task Force, and a few days ago he released his organization's recommendations for updating AI legislation. Before he joins Amber in conversation, here's his take on this issue and some background on how Canada failed once with social media legislation. So now it's time to get things right with AI.
AI Spotlight.
The Honourable Evan Solomon, Minister of Artificial Intelligence and Digital Innovation.
So back in May, when Mark Carney announced the creation of a new Department of Artificial Intelligence, a lot of people in my world, the people working on tech policy, all wondered the same thing. What exactly would an AI minister do?
Our mandate is to build.
Well, we got our answer pretty quickly. The government wants Canadians to start using AI. The worry is that if we don't start now, we'll all get left behind.
This is, in some sense, an AI arms race.
This is a reasonable argument. AI has the potential to be a transformative technology. And Canada needs to be in the game. But there's also a fundamental problem here, which is that right now, most Canadians just don't trust it. This is sometimes framed as a literacy problem or a training problem. Maybe Canadians just don't get how this technology works. But I actually think Canadians have good reason to be wary of the tools that they're already using right now. Maybe you've seen the headlines. AI toys were caught talking to kids about bondage. Meta's chatbot is having sensual conversations with children, and ChatGPT has provided instructions on self-mutilation and suicide. All of these stories speak to a fundamental consumer safety problem. These products were rolled out without any real oversight, and we're beginning to see the consequences.
At least 7 families are suing tech giant OpenAI, claiming that its ChatGPT program drove people to suicide and harmful delusions.
So now we have a gap. A government that wants us to use AI, and a population that just doesn't trust it. This is one of the reasons why the government created an AI strategy task force. And I was asked to be part of it, to try and answer a question that a lot of Canadians have right now. How do we actually make this technology safe? It's sort of a daunting question. Even the people building AI don't totally understand how it works. But I think I figured out at least part of the answer. Roll back the clock 20 years, and we were getting similar sales pitches around another technology, social media. We were being told that it would reshape the world and turbocharge the economy. And in some ways it did. But it also came with a whole slew of unintended consequences. And to try and address those, the Trudeau government created the Online Harms Act. At its core was a very simple idea. Social media platforms that carry risk also carry responsibility. The advantage of the Online Harms Act is that it regulates the systems, not specific features or technologies, which means it is applicable to social media feeds as it is to AI chatbots. Essentially, the Act requires tech companies to do 3 things. 1, they must complete risk assessments on their products before they launch them on the public. 2, they must build in additional safety measures for products that are used by our children. And 3, they have to make their data public so that we can all hold them accountable. That was the core of the act. That's it. And it was actually pretty popular across the political spectrum. But it died on the Hill, not because the core idea was flawed, but because politics got in the way. But there's another challenge here too.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real.
It's becoming harder and harder to tell what's real and what is not. Our social media feeds are now filled with fake political ads and AI-generated crypto scams. The government needs to demand that AI content is clearly labeled so that Canadians can separate truth from deep-faked fiction. Finally, and critically, Canadians need to be brought into the conversation about what AI they want in their lives and how they want it to be governed. When close to 80% of Canadians are worried about the negative consequences of AI, the onus is on the government to listen to them. We left citizens out of the conversation about social media and have seen the consequences on our elections, on our communities, and on our kids. We just can't make the same mistake again. Look, I want to be clear here. This isn't an argument for some sweeping AI law. But if the government wants Canadians to use AI, then they need to make sure it's safe. We have a second chance to get that right. Let's not waste it.
Taylor, we just watched the video that you released, which gives us a really great primer of what is going on in Canada today. Probably there are a lot of people who are listening who maybe weren't familiar with things like the Online Harms Act, the Consumer Privacy Protection Act. When you look at where we're at right now, what is the next best step for Canada and how quickly do we have to move forward?
Well, I mean, we're kind of in an interesting moment where there are a series of digital policies and processes that began with the previous government, but a lot's happened since then. Neither the update to our Privacy Act nor the Online Harms Policy, both of which have been through months and months, in some cases years of consultation and tabling and retabling through Parliament, and both sort of died on the order paper when Trudeau left at the last election, but are more relevant than ever. However, a lot of things have changed, right? Our position with the United States is radically different. The posture of the United States to governments trying to govern digital technologies is different. And the nature of the technologies themselves are pretty fundamentally different than they were a year ago. So I think it's urgent. I think there's some baseline things we can do to at least ensure some sort of democratic integrity in the way these technologies are used. But we'll see with this, particularly this national AI strategy, what the government's willing to do.
I was at an event that you and your team hosted just a couple of months ago, and this is purely anecdotal, but I am feeling a little more optimistic that after many years of not doing much, Canada might actually do something. You have an inside view in some ways, being part of the AI task force. How optimistic are you that some action is going to take place in the next few months?
More optimistic than I'd say I was when this government was first elected. I think it's worth sort of reflecting on the arc they've been around AI in particular. When Carney was elected and appointed as a first AI minister, right, Minister Solomon, who I know you've had the chance to interview on, I think, multiple occasions, it was pretty clear that they were trying to carve a new posture for Canada vis-a-vis AI and AI policy in particular, and really lean into an adoption agenda. They wanted Canadians to use more AI in our lives, in our businesses, in our institutions, and they wanted to help scale the AI sector in Canada as a potential industrial strategy. And they made that really clear that this was their priority. The minister, one of his first statements about AI was that we are over-indexing for regulation or safety, right? And I think that was a real sign of the direction they wanted to go. Since then, however, I think they've heard that that's not where Canadians are at. And I mentioned this in the video, but I think it's really striking. Canadians do not trust AI. Only 32% of Canadians trust AI. 80+% of Canadians thinks it threatens their job. It threatens their job, right? Like, it's hard to imagine anything more sort of profound on someone's life than a technology potentially taking away their livelihood. And 80% of the country thinks this threatens it. 70+% think it threatens the safety of their kids. Again, like core concerns. And the government's heard that. And I think that means that while they might have been predisposed to just push on this sort of limited guardrail AI adoption agenda, I think they now know and have heard that trust is essential for adoption. Canada's not going to adopt this technology, or Canadians aren't going to adopt these technologies if they think they are dangerous or not beneficial to their livelihood. And that's going to require, in my view, some sort of regulatory regime.
Now, it's interesting because there are a number of different groups from across the country, and all of those groups, I would argue, are doing really incredible work when it comes to trying to help to protect children online. But it is also fair to say that many of those organizations have a different goal in terms of what those protections look like. I've heard organizations and I've met with organizations that want to have an age limit. So let's start there. What is your opinion on that?
So, in my view, a ban on social media, either under 16 or under 14, which has become quite, I don't want to say popular, is not quite the best word, but I mean, Australia's now done it. Spain just did one today. France is likely about to do an under 16 ban. The UK is debating it. And our government has said that they're considering it as well, under 14. Um, my challenge with a ban is that in and of itself, it isn't a panacea for this wide set of problems we face in these technologies. It assumes that the second the ban is lifted, so the second, in our case, you turn 15, that all of a sudden you're capable of engaging with what is ultimately unsafe products. It also puts the blame on the kids themselves and takes something away from them that is potentially a meaningful part of their lives, rather than putting the focus on the causes of those harms, which are the design of the products themselves, which we know are unsafe. So in my view, a better policy approach, and this is the core of the Online Harms Act and the core of most of, I think, the most effective child safety regulatory regimes in the world, is to place the onus on the companies themselves, the people producing the products, to ensure that they are safe before they deploy them in our market. And so to me, that's the better policy approach. Now, there is a challenge that even if our Online Harms Act, if it's retabled, suggests building a regulator and creating this kind of risk and transparency regime, it will take some time to have an effect. And I think there's probably a case for a moratorium on social media use for kids under a certain age as a temporary measure, recognizing that it actually is a really urgent situation. And parents and teachers are, as you say, like there's groups who are very, very concerned and angry, frankly, that there's no protections in place. So in the short term, maybe you put a limit on until this system gets up in place and the companies can prove via it that their products are safe. So I think, to me, that's something kind of a compromise there.
And perhaps, it's both, maybe having rules around the design of some of this technology, but also age limits in place. But the one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I certainly understand that you cannot speak for the government whatsoever, but I've been hearing this
They
number.
would not want me to, trust me.
I've been hearing this number floating around that in Canada we are considering potentially banning social media for kids under 14. And when I hear that, I am kind of puzzled because what we've seen in many other parts of the world is that it's under 15 or under 16. And under 14 is kind of an incremental move. So do you have any sense of even where that age came from?
I don't, I'd be really interested why they landed on that. In theory, there is already a restriction under 13. So the terms of service of these platforms, of social media platforms, of all of them, I think, is you can't be on under 13. But that is a very poorly enforced age restriction. In fact, there are very clear design choices made by these companies to help users circumvent those age limitations. So it's a very soft limit. But even just upping it to 1 year, is that really making a categorical difference to the nature of this problem? And which problems is that solving for? This is the other challenge of a ban, is um, there are a wide range of potential harms on social platforms, and they are different by different kinds of platforms. But which ones is an under 14 ban solving? So is it, and what makes you more vulnerable to those harms when you're 14 than when you're 15? So is it really about our sort of brain development and mental capacity when we're a young teenager versus an old teenager? Well, maybe, but I'd like to see that articulated if we're drawing that line at 14. If it's about vulnerability to sextortion on Snap and child sex trafficking, well, I don't think that materially changes when you turn 15. So I think our policy should address that problem or up the age if we don't think we can, right? So I really, those that are supporting a ban, I think the onus is on them to articulate which of the potential harms that we know exist in the social ecosystem it's tempting to address, or is this just a throwing up our hands exercise saying everything else has failed, we're at a loss, let's cut off access? And if that's the case, then I think we still need, the onus is on us to still do the other things that we know will work, which is a regulatory regime.
So one of the things I know that you've spoken a lot about is perhaps a new concern for parents, which is the introduction of AI chatbots and
Yeah.
companions and the synthetic relationships that
Yeah.
young people are forming with these chatbots. How does that change this conversation? Because listen, we were clearly too late when it came to social media, and we kind of dropped the ball there. But what's happening today that parents should know about?
Well, I think the nature of the relationship and the dynamic between the technology and the platform and the user is pretty fundamentally different. On social media, you're exposed to content that other people create or communication that other people initiate with you, either on an open platform. So the challenge is the type of content and your access to it and the way that content is filtered to you or not, right? That is a problem of attention. It is we open our social feeds and we are presented with content that takes our attention. Something different is happening with chatbots, particularly with companions, where we are entering into generally one-to-one relationships that have an intimacy to them. They're not a pool of content out in the universe that we're being exposed to. We are in dialogue with, ultimately, an AI. And I think that creates a separate set of challenges. I mean, it's pretty striking the scale to which these companions are being used. I saw a survey the other day that 70% of American Gen Z use a AI companion on a regular basis in their lives. So these things are a part of their lives in a meaningful way. And the question then is, what kinds of harms are unique to that capacity? And tragically, we've seen a lot of them. Like on the worst possible end, AI chatbots convincing or seemingly convincing people to take their own lives or to harm themselves. But there's a much wider range, I think, of spectrum of ways these chatbots are entering our lives, and we might want to put some safety precautions around. The good news from my perspective is that the baseline tool to address those safety concerns is probably the same as the best tool for social media, which is to put the onus on the companies who are building and profiting from the tools to ensure that they are safe before they're deployed on kids in Canada. And I think that's just where we have to go with chatbots. And that means combining chatbots with our other mechanisms for regulating social media.
And I think that's a nice sort of lead into my next question for you, because one of the things that I noticed with your recommendations as of late is that it's a little bit different than maybe what other people are recommending. Because you say, and I'm just going to read your
Okay.
post here, it's about updating two existing frameworks. Now, some people have said, hey, we just need to throw out the Online Harms Act altogether. You're not saying that.
No, I think if what we care about is consumer safety and citizen safety, and ensuring that the products that we are using, the digital products we are using, have a base safety standard, then the Online Harms Act mechanism is probably the right one. That went through years and years of consultation. It's based on what we know from countries around the world, what worked and hasn't worked in other jurisdictions. And I think we could just apply it both to social media and to this new phenomena of chatbots. And that at least gets at some of the baseline safety issues around child safety and more generally, safety issues online. Now, there may be a time when we need broader AI regulation. Like, I'm not saying that's not going to necessarily be needed at some point. But I do think there's a risk in saying we need to start from scratch and build an entirely new policy apparatus for this thing that we don't even really understand yet fully, as opposed to starting with the baseline protections that we know we can ensure using mechanisms that we already have a pretty good grasp on.
One of the things you said just a minute or two ago is put the onus on the tech companies. And I don't know if I'm someone who is just maybe discouraged because of some of the reporting I've done over the years, but
Yeah.
I see some of these tech companies that are influencing our children. And let's be honest, it's not just our kids, it's also adults. It's also, our parents and our grandparents are
Which
impacted
is
by.
why a focus singularly on kids protection, I feel, is missing the broader policy
Exactly.
framework here, right? Like, it isn't just yes, kids have particular vulnerabilities and needs potentially, but it's not unique. These problems aren't unique to kids. I agree with you.
So when you put the onus on the tech companies to
Yeah.
make better design choices,
Mm,
how does that pan out here in Canada when we've
mm,
seen in the past with the Online News Act, for example, where we tried to actually make some
mm.
headway, and then all of a sudden Meta started blocking all of news on Facebook and Instagram. So we
Yeah.
don't seem to have the sway or the influence to be able to impact the decisions that those tech
Mm.
companies make, and a lot of them don't seem to want to actually make those safer decisions.
Yeah, and I would say the problem's even greater than that in the sense that we now have the closest alignment between the interests of Silicon Valley and the powers of the White House as we've ever seen. And we've seen a White House willing to use their own powers, their powers, particularly on trade agreements, um, to represent the interests of these tech companies. So there's no question that's an issue. Um, on online safety, though, the difference between that and the Online News Act is Online News Act, we were a first mover and we were being made an example of. Meta really didn't want that policy to be replicated in other jurisdictions, which is why they came down so hard on us here. It wasn't about us, as much as we might have wanted it to be. It was about the rest of the world that was watching and maybe thinking about replicating that policy. It's a little bit different with online harms because we're not a first mover. So essentially, what we're just saying is we are going to bring our own obligations on the companies up to something similar as what exists for all of Europe, the UK, and Australia, and increasing number of other democracies around the world, including Brazil, Indonesia, right? It's like there's a standard emerging of product safety and transparency requirements being placed on these companies by democratic countries around the world. So it would be difficult for them to leave the Canadian market when we are simply demanding something that large numbers of countries in the world already demand, right? We're not reinventing the wheel here. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be retaliation from the US. And I think um, it is certainly possible that there will be costs to doing something like this. But are we okay with digital products that are convincing Canadian kids to take their lives? Like, where's our line, right? And I have to think some form of safety requirements on these technologies that are shaping our lives and our societies are worth fighting for. But we'll see if they're going to. They might not. The government might not fight for them.
It's also fair to say, I mean, the government has a responsibility to protect its own citizens. And I think what we've seen, especially with younger people, but I would argue with all of us, especially with the introduction as of late with the amount of fake news and deep fakes. I mean, our societies have become impacted in ways that are more harmful than, Donald Trump waking up and posting on Truth Social that he's mad at Canada.
So let's take that example. I shouldn't have gone straight to the self-harm necessarily example, because I think that is the most sort of extreme. But look at the issue with the Grok undressing capacity. I mean, here is a platform that knew full well their tool was going to be used for this. And sure enough, the second they turned on that capacity, it was widely used in Canada for kids and teenagers to undress photos of each other. And is that acceptable to us as a society, for that to be available in our society for kids or adults, frankly? And if the answer is no, then I think it's incumbent on governments to do something about it, or they are allowing it. They are de facto allowing that kind of behavior and technology to exist in our society. And the best way of stopping that kind of design decision is by putting some responsibility and punitive damage on companies that don't abide. And that's what these regimes do.
It also feels like it's just time to draw that line in the sand,
I
right?
agree. Yeah.
And this is the thing that frustrates me to no end, is that I sometimes hear from people who are building tech companies in
Mm.
Canada, like, "Oh, it's a free market, just let tech companies do what they're gonna do." But the reality is that having measures in place to protect young people and really any online users in Canada is not going to impact the innovation opportunities in this country, but sometimes those messages get a little bit mixed up.
They do, although I don't know how widely viewed that perspective. I think we hear that's quite a loud view in certain segments of the tech sector, but I don't get the sense that that's a dominant view in the tech sector. And I think you're right. If having no restrictions on the development of unsafe products is a precondition for an industry to scale, I think we have a problem. And I'm not sure imposing just baseline safety requirements and transparency requirements on the technology sector really speaks to the innovation of it at all. I mean, I think this is just what democratic societies do and what citizens are demanding.
A couple of more questions for you before I let you go.
Sure.
I had Cory Doctorow on the
Mm,
podcast a few months ago after
mm,
attending your event in
mm,
Montreal. And one of the things he said, and I do want to kind of leave on an optimistic
mm,
note, is
mm,
that individuals, citizens do have power when it comes to the decisions that are being made with
mm.
these tech companies and the experiences that we are having online. It, for people who are listening or watching this, what would you say they can do to help move us along on this front? Is there anything?
Yes, I mean, we certainly have power and agency over the tools we use. But I'm very reluctant to place the onus on individuals, whether they be children and teenagers or parents or teachers, to solve the problems that we've allowed to accumulate in the digital ecosystem. I don't think it's just their responsibility to solve every problem that's been created by some of the largest companies in the world that we've allowed to embed their tools in our society writ large with almost no oversight. I mean, that's a huge onus to put on individuals. These tools are important to our lives, and we use them in ways that are core to our participation in democratic society. And to all of a sudden say that every potential risk or harm embedded in those tools are the responsibility of us to both understand, figure out, mitigate against, get our kids off of, monitor, survey, change behavior, reestablish norms, participate in our society differently, get our information from different places. The responsibility we're putting on the individual doesn't seem appropriate to me. I think these are collective problems that we've allowed to accrue. And to me, that requires democratic governance. And sure, there's going to be choice and agency within that, but we need to raise the bar of safety and reliability of information. And then choice, I think, will be more fruitful within it. And that's a collective responsibility, not an individual one.
Absolutely. I've said this before, but when I wrote Outsmarting Your Kids Online, I think it was back in 2016, I regret writing
Yeah.
that book because I realized over time that it was impossible for parents to really do anything. But I do think these conversations that we're having, I also think, for people to talk to their public officials locally or federally and start to raise more awareness about this can always be a good thing as well. Just one final question for you. For people who want to read more about this issue, I do want to say that you have a wealth of information and data. You've touched on some of it today, but where is the best place for them to go?
Well, the research center that I run at McGill, the Center for Media Technology and Democracy, we do a wide range of work on this space, on both the policy front and trying to understand the nature of the challenge. And through the podcast that I host for the Globe and Mail, where I have conversations called Machines Like Us, and we have conversations on a weekly basis on all these topics with some of the best people around the world on them.
Excellent. Well, listen, Taylor, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for all of the incredible work you're doing in this space. Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
That's all for this episode. I do have to say, I am hopeful we might make some headway on AI regulation in this country. As I've mentioned on past episodes, and as Taylor said in his interview today, we really messed up the first time around, so let's make sure we get it right this time.
I am optimistic that something will happen, and hopefully sooner than later. It needs to happen within months and not years, as we've talked about before. So fingers crossed on that front. And speaking of getting things right, a new episode is coming up this month where we're going to talk to the founder of a company that is making it easier for seniors to age in place. This is thanks to a new category of tech that takes things back to the basics with some much needed simplicity to make our homes smarter. As always, thank you so much for listening to our show on SiriusXM at channel 167 or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next week.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.